So with apologies to those who've been waiting since 5:45, which may include some of you in here. Looking at when was Revelation written. Now you remember there were three general theories of when the book was written. One of the most well-known, most prominent is the late 90s. And then there's one that is gaining some popularity and among the brethren about early to mid-80s. And that's based on a text from Revelation 17. But one thing that we've been looking at is from the pre-AD 70, viewpoint, which is what I hold, is that the book, again, remember, noting or believing that the book is written before AD 70 and believing that everything was fulfilled in AD 70 is not the same thing. And so I want to show you some more things to why I believe it's an early date of writing, but not an early date of total fulfillment. With regard to, we looked at Revelation 1, 2, and 3. Just very quickly, Revelation 1:1. John says, these things must shortly come to pass. Verse 3, the time is near. Verse 9, there's identification with the tribulation. I am your companion in the tribulation. Now some translations do not render the definite article. Some of them simply say, I am your companion in tribulation and the kingdom. But the text says the tribulation and the kingdom. And we noted that there is a difference in the way that the Bible uses the word tribulation. Sometimes just general tribulation and persecution, but there is the tribulation, which applies to the tribulation of Matthew 24, 29 to 31. And I believe that John is associating himself with that particular tribulation. And so my point is that you find the reference, the internal references or internal evidence supersedes external evidence. Also, not only are these phrases particular to other passages in the New Testament, I forgot to write it down. There is a text, and somebody can look it up if you've got like a Bible concordance on your phone. But there's a reference. There's a reference in this book, in the book of Revelation, to the statement that says, let the rocks or the mountains fall on us. The cry says, let the mountains fall on us. And that's that is also found in one of the parallel texts of the fall of Jerusalem. I don't think it's in Matthew 24. It may be in Luke 21. Luke 23. What's that? This is Luke 23. Luke 23. Yeah, that's in verse number 30. In verse number 30. And then you find it in Revelation chapter 6 and also in chapter 9. Chapter 9 and verse, let's see here, it says 9 and verse 6. It says, men will seek death in those days and not find it. And so you have that reference there in Revelation 9 and 6:16 says, the kings of the earth, the great men, rich men, commanders, mighty men, every slave, every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks and of the mountains, saying to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? And so that terminology also fits nicely with the situation of the Great Tribulation and the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, there are some things just very quickly in Revelation chapter 6 with regard to the 6 seals. Now, I'm not going to be dogmatic about these things so far as that I'm saying these things in Revelation chapter 6 are exactly, what they might represent. I'm just saying they lend themselves to this interpretation. For example, in Revelation chapter 6 and in verse number 2, you have the first seal in 6 and verse 1 and 2. And you have the one who was sent out to conquering and to conquer. Well, who conquered Jerusalem? It was Rome. And you have a conqueror who is released to conquer. In the second seal, you have conflict. You have wars and rumors of wars. You have in the third seal scarcity. I'm trying to find verse number 5 and 6. You have scarcity on the earth. Talking about that a quart of wheat sold for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. You have the fourth seal, widespread death, in verses 7 and 8. You have the fifth seal, the cry of the martyrs, which could be a reference to the persecution of Nero in the early 60s. Nero died, I believe, in about 68, in the year 66 or 67. And he was among the first of the Roman Caesars to openly persecute Christians. You have the sixth seal, which are cosmic disturbances, verses 12 through 17. And these are, and Jesus talked about the sun will refuse to shine, the moon will be turned into blood, the stars falling from heaven. All of those references used in Matthew 24 and in the parallel accounts are used to describe the destruction of Jerusalem. And then you have in Revelation chapter 7, those who are delivered, the deliverance of those who are saved, and they were saved because they watched for the signs of Matthew 24. But now look in Revelation chapter 10 and verse number 7. In the days of the sounding of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound, the mystery of God would be finished as he declared to his prophets. The gospel of Christ is repeatedly referred to as the mystery in the New Testament. It is also said of the gospel that the prophets and righteous men, for example, in 1 Peter 1 and verse 10, it says, the angels and prophets desired to look into the gospel. In other words, while God's plan was unfolding through the course of the Old Testament and brought into fruition, the angels and the prophets were prophesying about it, but they didn't get to see it. The angels are in heaven, and they can only see it as it unfolds on the earth. They're not privy to the preaching of the gospel in heaven. They're watching it unfold. But then it says the mystery is finished. In other words, the gospel has been preached to the whole world. And Jesus said in Matthew 24:14 that the gospel had to be preached to the whole world before the destruction of Jerusalem could take place. And since it did take place, then by extension we know that it was preached to the whole world. And Colossians 1:6, Colossians 1:23, Romans 10:16 all declare that the gospel was preached to the whole world. Okay, so you have Revelation 10 and verse 7, a reference to the finishing of the preaching of the gospel to the whole world. You have Revelation 11 and verse number 2, where the holy city is given to the Gentiles. Well, what happened in the destruction of Jerusalem? The Roman army came in and completely destroyed it and trampled it underfoot. So you have the whole, and by the way, Jerusalem is the holy city. I mean, that would be the holy city. It was the city of the Jews, and it was the city where the church was established. And so you have the holy city given to the Gentiles in Revelation 11 and verse 2. And then you have in chapters 12 and 13, a retelling of the account, the picture of the birth of the church in Revelation 12, and emperor worship in Revelation 13, and Vespasian instituted temple tax in about 69, in the year 69. He ruled from 69 to 79, and so there was the imposition of the didrachman, which was paid for Roman temple upkeep. And so you have, these are internal things that lend themselves to the destruction of Jerusalem. In other words, the descriptions of the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, why don't I believe all of it happened in AD 70? Turn to Revelation 17. And while you're turning there, a good friend of mine made a great point. And his point was, what evidence do we have that John was at Patmos before AD 70? And I thought, I've never given that any thought. Because John said he was on the Isle of Patmos, exiled, for the sake of the gospel. And I guess my response to that would be, what evidence do we have of John being anywhere after Acts chapter 8? I mean, when Philip preached the gospel to the Samaritans in Acts chapter 8, it says, in order that the Holy Spirit might be administered to them, they called for Peter and John to come down from Jerusalem that they might lay their hands on them. As best I can tell, there's never another mention of John after Acts chapter 8. All right? Acts chapter 8 took place within 10 years of the establishment of the church, which would have put it sometime in the early 40s. So we don't have any record of John being anywhere. And so the contention that where do we have evidence that John was at Patmos before the year 80 is an argument from silence. You don't know where John was. From the time of Acts 8 and the preaching of the gospel to the Samaritans, which took place before the preaching of the gospel to the Gentiles in Acts chapter 10, we don't have any reference to John after that. So we don't know where he was. And so John has easily been deposed by any of the Roman governors, the territorial governors, or anybody in that region. So not knowing where John was is an argument from silence, and we can't say, if we don't know where he was, then we can't say where he wasn't. Does that make sense? If we don't know where he was, we can't say where he wasn't. And so, Revelation 17, and in verse number 5, you have, in verse 4, you have a woman arrayed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication, and on her forehead a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled in amazement. In chapter 18, you have the fall of Babylon the Great, which again, Babylon is a reference to Rome. And you have in Revelation 18, verses 9 through 20, the world is mourning the loss of Rome. Because Rome made everybody rich. All the world trade, all these things, people made their living dealing with the Roman Empire. And when Rome fell, their source of income went with it. And you see in verse number 16, it says, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who sailed by ship, sailors, as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city! For in 1 hour she is made desolate. All right? Well, when did Rome fall? If you remember. Come on, Connor. You're that close. 476. Last 2 Sunday mornings we've studied this. 476. All right, if John is writing about the fall of Rome, and the fall of Rome didn't take place till 476, then obviously everything in the book of Revelation did not come to fruition in AD 70. Because the city that was destroyed in AD 70 was not the one that the kings of the world lamented over. Nobody lamented over the destruction of Jerusalem. I mean, people worldwide hated the Jews. But everybody loved Rome because that's where the money was. And so the destruction of Rome is described in Revelation 17 and 18. So obviously that part of the book hadn't been fulfilled. Then you have Revelation 20, 21, and 22, which is a picture of the great judgment scene. I mean, Revelation 20 and verse 12. Actually, in verse 11, it says, I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and heavens fled away, and there was no place found for them. Well, what's going to happen when Jesus comes back to judge the world? Heaven and earth are going to pass away. Well, we find in verse 12, I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to the things written in the books, every man according to his works. I mean, this is a picture of the great judgment scene, where the judgment of all mankind is found. And whoever's name is not found in the Lamb's book of life is cast into the lake of fire, which is the second death. That's hell. The first death is our physical death. The second death is eternal perdition. So Revelation 20 deals with eternal judgment, or the final judgment. Revelation 21 and 22 deals with the beauties of heaven that are to be enjoyed by those who are judged to be righteous at the end of Revelation 20. So obviously the judgment hasn't taken place because we're all still here. The earth is here. I mean, the heavens and the earth are still here. And so I say that to make the note that believing that the book is written before AD 70 is not the equivalent of saying it was all fulfilled in AD 70. So about the first 16 chapters, or so chapters, lend themselves to the time frame of the destruction of Jerusalem. Chapters 17 and 18 lend themselves to the destruction of Rome in 476, in AD 476. And chapters 20 to 22 deal with the final judgment of all men and the abode of the righteous place, or the place of the righteous, their eternal abode in heaven. So that's why I believe the book was written before AD 70. There are no events in history that correspond with the things that are written in this book, like the destruction of Jerusalem. I mean, I think, and here's one thing we need to understand. This book meant something to the people that received it. You know, a lot of our religious friends and neighbors think none of Revelation has come true yet. Which means what? The book has been meaningless for about 2,000 years. But the book meant something to the people who received it. And if none of it has come true in 2,000 years, then what does the book really mean? And what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. And again, the three phrases, chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 3, chapter 1, verse 9, and even particularly you could look at chapter 1, verse 7, with coming in clouds, all reference a short time frame, and nothing happened in AD 96 or shortly thereafter that fits that bill. Nothing happened in AD 81 that fits that bill. But AD 70 fits the bill of the destruction of Jerusalem and the description in the first 15 or 16 chapters. All right, so look, if you want to believe it's written in AD 96, I don't care. You can still go to heaven. You know, look, I might be wrong. I mean, I could be wrong, and the 96 guys could be right. Or me and the 96 guys could be wrong, and the year 81 guys could be right. But you can go to heaven and believe in any of them.
Devil's going to be chained for 1,000 years.
Yeah, that's Revelation 20. Don't even bring that up, Furman. I'd rather you volunteer me to lead a song as bring that up right now.
Well, all this stuff they're talking about in here is different periods of time, isn't it?
I think there are three periods that are listed there. Again, divided from chapters 1 to 16, 17 to 19, 20 to 22.
Well, I always looked at each one, you know, like the different colored horses as 1, 2, 3, 4. or where you want to go with. Yes.
Well, I think that section of Scripture lends itself to all the things that pertain to the destruction of Jerusalem. I mean, there was a besiegement of the city.
Well, it's still a period of time, see, each one.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, see, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, but they would represent very brief periods of time in that, because the destruction of Jerusalem took 3 years.
Yeah.
It took 3 years. The destruction of Jerusalem didn't happen overnight, like in Daniel chapter 5, when Daniel told Belshazzar, tonight your kingdom's given to the Medes and the Persians. I mean, everything was fine one day and the next day it wasn't. That didn't happen to Jerusalem. They besieged that city. They starved them to death. I mean, it was unspeakable, the things that happened. And when the time was right, then they came in and destroyed the city proper. And again, it took place beginning in AD 67 and was accomplished in AD 7. So it wasn't just an overnight sudden thing, which also, Kyle, won't lend itself, like you and I were discussing, about how it can't be all fruition in one moment in time. All right, any questions about that? I really appreciate your patience. We've been here an hour and 40 minutes if you were here at 5 o'clock, but it's been a good time. I don't mean it's been enjoyable, but I believe it's been profitable. And I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate everybody's patience on that. Any questions? Remember, Friday, 5:45 potluck. Saturday, 5:45 potluck. Sunday, meet, eat, and meet. Invite folks to our winter weekend meeting with Jeremy Hall. Jeremy is very well qualified to discuss the things that he's going to talk about. And I'm not going to share any of those reasons with you. If he feels like he wants to do it, he will. If not, he won't. But trust me, Jeremy's a young guy, very well studied, but he's I think as a young man, very qualified to talk to us about these matters of faith and dealing with loss and whatnot. So Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday, everybody be praying, inviting. And Lord willing, we'll see everybody on Wednesday at 6:30. I didn't call on anybody to lead closing prayer. Ryan, will you dismiss us? Everybody, yes, ma'am.
Wade Hood, one of the elders at Hackleburg, they put him in the hospital today. So as soon as they had a room, they put him in ICU at Lawrence.
ECM.
Thank you.
Another one of those alphabet hospitals.
Yes. He's not doing very well.
Wade Hood.
Wade Hood.
All right. All right, if you would be on your feet, and I'll ask Ryan to dismiss us with a word of prayer.